Welcome to the Books and Beer Book Club, coming to you from Cercis Brewing Company in Columbus, Wisconsin. We're a different kind of book club, only reading books by authors who can visit us in person or via Zoom for the discussion. We've been going strong since 2015, meeting nearly every month. We're now making these fun and informative discussions available to you on video. I'm your host, Valerie Beal. I'm an author myself, and I enjoy interviewing our guest authors and facilitating the questions from our readers both in person and on Zoom. We hope you enjoy this replay. To join us live, please check out our schedule on our Facebook page at Books and Beer Columbus.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. But I'm like just a little sad because it's the last one, but we'll talk about that. So obviously this is Patricia Skalka. And we have welcomed you prior to this.
Yes.
I believe it's what we would call the sticky floor dive bar around the corner when we used to be. Is that awful to say that? I shouldn't say that in a recording, should I? But it is no more. It is out of business. So I guess, and I didn't say its name, but this is a much nicer location. We like it better, but we were glad that you were able to come back and talk to us. I'm thinking that we were probably we were reading the third or fourth book in the series, third at the time that we had you visit us. Who here had been to that one? Do you guys work maybe? So I'm going to cover probably some of the same ground because maybe we don't remember and ask you, things about your writing career. We were talking at dinner a little bit about your background in writing and in kind of like coming out of a nonfiction background a little bit. Why don't you, give us your resume?
Oh, my resume. Okay.
If you would.
No, I actually have been a writer for my whole life. I think I started writing when I was 5 years old. I'd sit at the kitchen table and pencil out and I'd print out little stories and stuff. And I remember when I wrote plays for my Girl Scout troop and all kinds of stuff like that. And when I was in the 7th grade, I won an essay contest sponsored by the local VFW and got a check for $25. And I thought, oh my God, I can make a
that's
living
big
doing
bucks.
this. Yeah, this is it. So I wrote for my school papers in high school. I was a college editor of my college paper. And I just always liked to write. So on all my jobs had to do with either writing or editing. So I was in public relations for a while. I worked for Today's Health magazine. I was an editor. And eventually I started doing freelance. And as a freelancer, I wrote any assignment, I would just take it. I wrote manuals, I wrote this, I wrote that. I wrote a lot of articles and I started eventually writing more and more articles for national publications like Working Women and McCall's and magazines like that.
Those are big publications.
Yeah. And eventually, I'll tell you the story. I got a phone call one day from a man who'd read an article that I'd written that was published in one of the airline magazines. And he said he was from the Reader's Digest and he was brand new at his job and he was getting like a little corral of or stable of writers. And he thought we might be able to work together. And I immediately hung up after we talked and I called my husband and assumed that he had set someone up to call, that this was a joke, and it wasn't. And so I had to go out and buy a copy of the magazine to see if his name was actually on the masthead, and it was. And I ended up becoming a staff writer for the Reader's Digest, and I worked for them for about 20 years. And I did human interest stories and medical stories, and I always read fiction. I love to read fiction. I love to read mysteries, and kind of what I wanted to be when I grew up was a novelist and a fiction, mystery writer. And all of that training, though, working with words and working with editors and interviewing people, trying to get inside their heads, because when you interview someone who's been through a traumatic experience, they can see it playing like a film in their mind. But if you ask them about it, they'll say, oh, it was horrible. Well, expand on that a bit.
That does not make a 2,000 word story.
It does not. You have to learn to pull things out, and like almost, would you say it was like? And they say, oh yeah, that's exactly. So you have to try and put yourself in their position. And that really helped in writing fiction and creating characters, because you get inside the head of the character. And you kind of learn, you're hearing them talk. They're talking to you and explaining kind of what they're thinking, what they're feeling. So all of that helped in making the transition. And yet, despite the fact that I was a published writer, that I had been, that I knew how to write, I knew how to put out a decent story, I spent a lot of time on my first novel writing it and rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it. Because I had to learn how to do that. There's a big difference between writing a 3,500 word piece and a 75,000 word book. I mean, there's no comparison. And, between writing nonfiction, which is where you're working with facts and things that you've discovered and quotes from people, and making everything up, coming up with the whole story in your mind. It's a very different animal. So it was still a learning process. I had to attend conferences and take craft sessions and have a critique, be in a critique group and things like that. So, and the truth of the matter is the first book, Death Stalks Dark County, I could not sell this for love nor money. I wanted to be traditionally published. The manuscript sat on a shelf in my office for 2 years gathering dust.
Did it? I'm so
Oh
surprised.
my God, it was
I love this book.
well, yeah, thank you.
I would have bought it right away.
Well, there you go.
But
If you'd been, but at that point in time, the whole publishing industry was kind of imploding on itself. I went to a conference in New York, a pitch conference, and I met one was an editor, one was an agent. They were both interested in it. And within 6 weeks, neither of them was in the business anymore.
Oh my God.
Everybody was it was just like scattershot. So I got really discouraged. And then one day I was cleaning out my office. So I take this huge printout of pages and I'm flipping through it. And by then I'd been removed from it enough that I thought, I could recognize that, hey, this is pretty decently written, it's not bad. And then I thought, I really know my characters. I'd recognize them on the street. Then I also realized I was the only person in the world who knew the story. If I didn't tell the story, it would never be told. And then, of course, I'd gone to an all-girls Catholic high school. And what the nuns taught you was if you start something, you finish it. So I thought, all right, one more go through. So I edited, I went through one more time. And I went to another conference and they started talking about looking locally, local publishers, local smaller publishers. And I got a list of 16, and the University of Wisconsin Press was on there. I went to their website. They published fiction. They had published mysteries. Seemed like a no-brainer.
Right.
So I sent them a query on a Friday afternoon. I got a response in an hour.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I refused to open the email because I thought it's going to be another one of these no thanks.
And it
blah, blah,
was
blah.
this, you said a Friday?
Yeah, on
You
a
know,
Friday.
and you ruin your weekend.
I didn't want to, yes, exactly. So I took the dog for a walk. I vacuumed the living room. And then I went up to my office and opened the email because I couldn't stand it, the tension. And it was, this looks interesting. Please send full manuscript.
Yay.
So that was the beginning of it. And I never intended to write a series.
Oh.
The notion of doing a series was totally intimidating because to me, a series was Sue Grafton writing thousands of books,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and I thought I can't do that. And but as I was writing this one, I started coming up with ideas. Well, what about this storyline? What about this storyline? So then I thought, I pitched it as a series, and I thought there would be 4, and in fact there are 7.
So I'm curious, from if you wrote it initially as a standalone single book, were there things that you had to then change to create more of an ongoing character arc for your main for Dave, for your main character?
Not really. Well, because I kind of, as I was writing it, knew, as I was going through when I first wrote it, I meant it as a standalone.
Yes.
But after going through numerous edits, of course, and it had, a lot of things changed, then I kind of left it. I knew what I had to do was make it credible that he would be in a position to solve these mysteries. So he starts he's a former homicide detective who comes to Door County in a very bad place, and personally because of things that have happened. And all he wants to do is escape the world. And he's a drunk, and he's, doesn't have anything to do with anybody, and he's rude, and he's not a nice guy. And he's working as an assistant park ranger. All he wants to do is sweep up trash and, take care of trees.
He's definitely underemployed.
Yeah, he's very underemployed.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have anything to do when people start dying. But at the end, what I did do was have him, he solves the crime, of course, and then he's elected sheriff. So then that gives him the position to be in, to then be the sheriff for the rest of the series. So that was the one thing that I really had to change.
Right.
And maybe I would have done things differently but I don't know. I didn't want it to be, I don't like a lot of coincidences, so I didn't want it just to be, oh, he happened to be on vacation, or he just happened to move there, or he
Right.
happened to be up fishing or something when all this is happening. I wanted him to have a real solid reason for going there. And he goes there with a commitment to be there 1 year. He hates it. He's like the one person in Door County who doesn't want to be there. All he can think of is he's got, at the time the book, in the opening of the book, he's been there 3 months. He's got 9 months to go and he can't wait to get out of there. So, that's how I set it up. So,
Well, and it worked. It
Yeah.
worked. He's reluctant. He really doesn't want to be solving any murders, right?
Yeah.
Even though his skill set from back in Chicago is
Yeah.
such that he'd be the perfect person. It worked, but it worked. And his like, we still like him, even though he's prickly, right?
oh, he's very
Like, so
prickly.
that's tricky to write, though. Write a character who, has all this like outside, shell stuff going on, who we care about. But you made us care about him, relatively quickly as it unfolds. Like, you learn, I forget how fast we learn what has happened to his wife and his daughter.
Chapter 1.
Yeah,
know.
so so it's, he's a sympathetic character.
Yeah.
Even though we wish he would be nicer to the people around him.
But people,
We get it.
what readers have really been able to like to commiserate with him, and many people have told me that his story is their story, that they rooted for him in his struggles. Not only does he drink too much, he's also smoking. He was trying to quit smoking, and he comes from a background where alcohol was very much part of his world. His father was an alcoholic. There was all the cynicism. He had all this stuff that he has to overcome. So people really were rooting for him. They sympathized with him, and he's got a heart of gold, which eventually kind of shines through. And so how can you not like somebody like that, I guess?
So does he meet Kate in the first book?
Yes.
And then they don't get married until like three, book 3. So, but that arc was very well done. That whole arc. Everybody appreciates that. Sometimes series can go off the rails with romance, like a mystery series, when you try to layer in the personal like
Yeah.
that. But I thought you did that very, very well.
Well, she hardly shows up in book 2 at all until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I did that deliberately because I didn't want to get that whole thing. And he is at the end of book 1, when he's the sheriff and he's permanent, he's going to be living there. He's also saddled with this horrible secret about Kate that he has to struggle with. And so I wanted that to kind of just simmer. I wanted the readers to be aware of that. How is he going to deal with that? He doesn't know. He doesn't know how he's going to deal with that.
So I'm always curious about how an author approaches the story arc for series versus the individual. Like, these are self-contained mysteries. We get the villain at the end, but we also have all the ongoing personal stuff. I'm just curious about the process for deciding on the personal story arc throughout, the series.
What I knew right from the start when I realized it was going to be a series was, okay, 2 things. One, that each book would be a standalone. There'd be a beginning, middle, end, the classic story arc, and they could be read individually.
Yes, they could. Yes.
And people have. Some people didn't know it was a series. They started with the 3rd book and thought, oh, wow. Then they found out, but it does work. I had one major thought in mind, that the overriding story arc of the entire series was in the way I framed it in my own head was it was Dave Cubiak's journey of personal redemption, that he would learn to live with what had happened, that he would learn to reconnect with life, and that he would learn to how do you deal with this enormous grief and all this guilt? You don't ever forget it. You don't wish it away. You learn to make it part of you. It's part of yourself, but it no longer is the dominating feature of your life. You learn how to return to living a normal, fulfilling life. And that was my purpose in writing it. And the only thing that I had to struggle with, well, a lot of things I had to struggle with, but the one thing that was really essential and very basic was, what do I do about, how do I help this guy? How do I move him out of this bad spot that he's in at the beginning? And the only way I could figure out was to move him through time, right? To move the stories through time. So he's 42 in the first book, he's 44 in the second book, he's 46. the books cover 20 years. He's 62 in the last book. So we cover a long range of time. And there are, so, I knew that there would be things that would happen to him, things that he would never really quite know how to respond to when people would ask him a question, issues of how do you open yourself up to trust yourself to love again, or trust yourself to be a parent again after you feel responsible for the death of your child? And, so it's not like, boom, he just does it. It's
Right.
like one step forward, a step back, a step to the side. And I kind of pace that through, not with just what happened to him, but what was happening to other characters, like his friend Evelyn Bethard gets married again because his wife had died. She'd been very ill in the first book. Well, she was dying in the first book. And in the second book, he's getting remarried, and Cubiak reacts very angrily. He's frustrated. How can you do this? He wants Bethard to justify replacing Cornelia. I mean, Bethard says, I'm not replacing her. No one can. But, and it's his internal struggle with, can he do this? Can he ever love again? How do you love someone new and still love the person who's not there? That's the kind of the tug of war that was going on there. So,
And don't you think too, I mean, that had to resonate with lots of people, right? And the fact that you took, you didn't resolve things. This wasn't one, like each book wasn't just 1 year. Like it was a long period of time for him. So did everybody finish this one? And I love the last scene with his son in Chicago. And I thought, so I love it when books come full circle in your, or a series or whatever, and you're back to that beginning point. And we know that the son has won these tickets to go to the game. It was a basketball game.
game,
Yeah,
right?
in
So it's
Chicago. And so like, oh God, he's gonna have to go back to Chicago, which he hasn't really done much. That last scene is just so good. It's just so good. So I just am like, oh, well done. Go ahead, Mary.
I'm curious, how did you let go? So you have lived with them, you love them, probably as much as you love your daughter. How would you let that?
So if you couldn't hear online, the question is from Mary about how she let go of these characters now that she's finishing the series, because she's loved them and lived with them so long. So.
Well, I miss Dave, and I kind of picture him and Bethard getting together at Pectus and having a beer and a burger and whatever, and with Amelia Pecta, who's their waitress, and she's giving them a hard time. So he's very much alive to me, and he's kind of still there in my life. But I knew that it was time when Kubiak felt that he was okay. He kind of let me know he was okay. And it was going to have to be that whole business with his son, where his son was going to have to ask those very pointed questions about love. And do you love me too? How do you do this? How do you balance this? How do you take what was and what is and bring them together in a way that makes sense to this 13-year-old boy? And the fact that Kubiak was able to do that was his way of letting me know that he was okay. And so that's why I was able to say, okay, you can have your time off now. You can relax. You don't have to, you can just go and do whatever it is you want to do. And whether he retires or not, I leave it a little bit fuzzy there, but
Yeah, you're right. I was kind of making an assumption that he would retire, but
he's talking about it, and yeah, and I knew that at some point I would know it was time for the series to end, and it just kind of comes to you.
yeah. So I was curious. I was going to ask that question, like, why 7 books? Why not 8 or 10 or 26 if we want to be Sue Grafton? Although she didn't make it to the end.
25.
Yeah. Felt like the right time. So
Yeah.
did you have an inkling of that when you were writing book 6 that 7 would be the last one?
I did.
Okay.
I did. And the other thing, if you've read the series, is that is the only book that's set in winter. And I did know that's the one decision I made when I knew I was going to write a series, was that the last book would occur in winter. Now, why I knew that, it just winter just seemed like the right time. So all the other books are either they're summer, spring, fall.
I don't think I realized that.
It's the only one.
Huh. So there you have it.
Yeah.
The covers are so wonderfully done. I don't know if you've all seen them online. Just beautiful. And you had said you had the same cover designer the entire time. But I mean, if you like Door County, if you love Door County, you know, like you're gonna appreciate this, the scenery that's on these. So I'm curious about your mystery writing process. Okay, so I have questions, and as Sylvia knows, and Mary as well, I just finished writing my first murder mystery. I'm wondering if you know who your villain is from the beginning, and if you ever change that, make that a different decision partway through.
I know who the villain is. There are people who write by the scene. You've heard this, you know.
Yeah,
pantsers.
Pantsers
Yeah.
versus.
And I plot it out
Okay,
beginning to end. I know exactly who did it and I know why they did it. And I write in all of my books, whatever is happening in the present time, the crime that Cubiak is trying to solve, usually a murder, has deep roots. So it always goes back. So I have to like layer that in some, I have to make it make sense, you know.
Right.
You know, it can't just be sort of like, we'll just pretend this happened back then. So I know all of these things. And the one time when I was writing it, and one of the books, I decided to change it at about 3/4 of the way through, who the person, you know, who really did it. And it was a mess and I hated it. And I ended up going back to the way it was originally plotted out, which what I felt kind of verified for me that I had put in the thinking, that I had really worked it out the way it was supposed to be. And when I tried to mess with it, it turned into mush. You know, it was just not what it was supposed to be. It wasn't good. So it kind of reinforced my faith in the process that I use. And it's interesting because you asked about like clues, and I'll give you an example from the second book. So in the second book, this is not a clue, but this is an example of how I work these things out. So I just start, it's called a beat line. You know how Alfred Hitchcock did storyboards, like a little sketch for each action. Well, a beat line is the same thing, but it's in words instead of pictures. So it's like the phone rings and Kubiak answers, then this happens, and this happens, and this happens, all the way through. So I might have like 13 pages, you know, beginning to end after several weeks of working on it. So but that's not enough. I need more than that.
sure. Yeah.
So how it grows organically. So I had puppies. The dog had puppies. So in the very beginning of the book, he deals with the puppies before he goes off to investigate these deaths. I'm looking at my beat line. There are no puppies. You know, there are puppies right at the beginning, then there's no puppies. And so I'm not writing a book on how to raise puppies, but if you're going to have them at the beginning, they have to show up again.
That's right.
So you put how many times should the puppies be there? I decided 4. So I'll put them here, I'll put them here, and I'll put them there. So the beat line grows with the puppies. And the same thing with the clues, and the same thing with people. And if there's like a long stretch and there's like an important character who is not there, she's not there. Okay, something's wrong. It's getting dull. It's getting, you know, there has to be some action. So then I maybe will shift something or move it or figure out a way to bring that character back into the story somewhere. And so it just keeps growing. Once I get like the main framework of it, it just grows from the inside out, filling in more and more and more and more.
So I was thinking about, this would be book 6. Yeah. Death washes short. Early in the story, you mentioned the last name of the person who dies. And somebody says, wasn't there a resort up on the other, you know, wherever, named that, like the Henley Resort or something like that. And then obviously that was put there purposefully, you know, as a clue, but we don't get back to that until a little later to find out that, oh yes, that he was, you know, a young boy, that was his parents' resort. Because a lot of this is, you know, small town. Everybody who's lived in Door County for a long time, they all know each other.
Right.
And they all know secrets about each other, or things that people don't talk about today, or, you know, tragedies that have happened or whatever. But all those like layers about, you know, who might hold a grudge about something. It's just so delicious. You know, it's just so fun. Like the whole idea of like the carnival ride accident. too. And anyway, if you've read that one, you know what I'm talking about. If not, I probably really haven't given anything away. Exactly. So maybe just a little, maybe just a little.
Maybe just a little.
The other thing about your villains is they're usually pretty normal people. You don't have serial killers really in these books. They're people who snapped,
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
or maybe they're mentally ill for a while or whatever. But you can look at them and see that because of certain circumstances, different circumstances, they would never have done what they've done. They're not going to be evil no matter what, but like things in their life have piled on, and then they've reacted with, a violent act or, covering something up. So sometimes the red herring, somebody looks like they're the guilty party, but they just happen to slink away into the darkness to pretend they weren't at the scene at the time and whatever. So just really fun unraveling, the clues, but the layers are so good. And I'm wondering, really your plot process sounds like is responsible for that, like really good detailed layering that makes you wonder as a reader. Yeah. And I mean, don't we love that when we're like, and you're sure by page 40 who it is, but that's really not who it is. And then you've got somebody new at page 75, and then so
Well, one of
like fun.
the things that human nature is human nature, right? And these are regional mysteries, but they deal with universal themes. We have
Yes.
rage, jealousy, greed, lust, love, hubris, unbridled ambition, you
True.
name it. And one of the things that I would like to think, I don't want readers to go running around killing anybody, but I would like, if you're reading it, to think, what would I do in that situation?
Mhm.
How would I react if I were the person who had been deceived for years by this person, and then find out they had done this horrific thing many, many years ago, like in the second book? Or what would I do if I were Ruby in the first book? How would I react if my whole life, if all of this, everything had just come crashing down and coming down, yes, you do snap there, or she did snap, but I mean, I can see that happening. Can the reader, can you see that happening to yourself? Can you empathize, not condone what the villain has done, but understand why they did it? That's what I'm trying to convey, why they did what they did.
Well, and I think that's why that works so well, and that's the tricky part about writing stories, like writing your villain, is that sometimes, I mean, you have to have some potentially redeeming qualities or just understandable, qualities, or, where we could see ourselves potentially acting in the same manner, or, I could see being that angry, I mean, I guess I like the way you put it, that they're universal themes.
Yeah. And that's the nice thing about it, because it's like human beings are the same everywhere. And I know that when I wrote the first book, there was a woman I talked with who was she ran a business in Dark County, and she said to me, it's like you were a fly on the wall. And all of our, when the business community would get together, there was a lot of antagonistic or negative or counter feelings about progress and what is progress and should we change. And those who wanted to keep things the way they were, and other people who wanted to like develop and develop and develop. And there was a lot of like headbutting about that. And I mean, probably any place in the world you go, this sort of thing goes on. So these are the kinds of things that people deal with. And like in the last book, the themes, there's a quote from Cervantes right at the beginning that says there are only two kinds of families in the world, the haves and the have-nots. And he said that a long time ago. And he's obviously talking in terms of money. But I took it also, yes, there are the haves and the have-nots in terms of wealth, but also in terms of love. And those are the two themes that kind of shape that story of, the person who loved and was never loved in return, and how that affected his attitudes and habits, and the people who felt cheated out of money that should have been theirs, that they're, you're grubbing around and you're doing all this stuff, and other people are living the high life, and you feel like something was not fair. This is not fair because of something that happened. Again, 40, 50, 60 years ago. So these things, I think it's just really a lot. It's like just listening to human nature
Mhm.
and how people would respond under certain circumstances.
Well, I mean, and there's a lot of like psychology to that. So it would make me think, like, if you had said that you had a psychology background, I wouldn't be surprised, if you had said that, because like you get into the inner workings of the way people react to different things. I think too, if you've ever spent time in Door County, that there's a bit of push-pull between people who live there, always lived there, between the people who live on like the coast, so to speak, versus the farmers in the middle, or the people who have, they may depend on tourist income, they might have orchards or whatever, but it's a very different life, right? And so you have that split. It would be the sixth book too, where like the farmer is having a problem with these people who are doing like, play acting.
Yeah.
And they're setting off cannons and things. And he's got a dairy herd that is reacting poorly. And I was like, growing up on a dairy farm myself, I was like, oh yeah, that's going to be a problem. Like, you're not being a good neighbor now. I think that can happen anywhere, too. And people have seen that. And even like, so I grew up here and moved back with it. People would be like talking to my husband in a different like venue where I wasn't with them. And they're like, so you are who? And you are, you're so-and-so son-in-law. Oh, well, now you're okay.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So if you ever grew up in a small town, it's like that a little bit. So yeah, I will paraphrase it in case you guys didn't hear online. Given that she had a background in writing, shorter pieces, why she didn't gravitate to short story versus novel, and will she go back to that? So
I happen to have a file drawer half full of terrible short stories that I've written.
You're
I-
not Alice Monroe.
It's a very rare skill and I don't have it. I've tried to write short stories and they just don't work, and I don't know why.
well, I'm surprised by that because because you would think that the skill set would translate. And I remember taking a class once from Marshall Cook. Do you remember Marshall Cook?
No.
So it was UW, continuing studies. And I said something like, I can write short stories, but I'm scared I won't ever be able to do a novel. He goes, well, just write, like, basically, quit whining, but then write each chapter like a short story. I mean, it can't completely resolve or you can't keep going, but
Yeah.
I thought that was good advice at the time. You don't think they work? I bet they work better than you think.
Well, I haven't looked at them. Maybe I should look at them. Maybe they are really good. I thought they were terrible when I wrote them. But I will take a look at them. I am working on a novella right now. Actually, I wrote it many years ago, and it's
Good.
not a mystery. But I'm dusting it off and revising it and thinking that maybe I'll do something with that.
And realistically, what would you do with a novella? Because it's not a format that is well respected or easy to model.
Well, apparently it is becoming more popular because I did try to publish it way back when I wrote it, and it was like nobody's publishing novellas, but they are now, is what I've been told. I guess we can thank the internet and tweets. People have shorter attention
I know,
spans.
that's right.
And novellas are coming back in vogue. So maybe hope springs eternal. I don't know. I hope so.
And what's novella, like a word count on that? 25, 20 to
No,
25?
well, it's 25 to, yeah. something
Yeah,
like
so it's short of a novel.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a question here, and I don't know, let's see if we can read it here. Did you do a lot of character studying, planning when you decided Cubiak would be your protagonist, or did you develop him along the way, book by book? Any regrets about whatever path you chose? I'm about to start book 4 with my main character and regret a little bit that I didn't flesh him out at the beginning half as much as I wish I had now. That's a very good question.
Yeah, okay, where to start on that? I spent a lot of time thinking about Dave, and basically I have a 23-page profile of Dave
Oh,
Cubiak.
that's impressive.
So, I mean,
You prepare well.
I wanted, my theory is that you should know your protagonist as well as you know your best friend. So,
Mhm.
his background, his childhood, his family's childhood, his values, his education, his dreams, his goals, his everything. I mean.
So even the things that don't make it on the
Oh.
page, these things inform
Right.
how you write his reactions,
Oh, yeah. I mean,
interests.
most of the stuff doesn't appear on the page,
Yeah.
but it tells me who he is, and then I
Mhm.
know what he will say and how he will act in a given situation. So it's like, you know, it's a very full picture of who this man is. And he did okay, I have to tell the story of how Death Stalks Door County came about. As I said, I always wanted to write a mystery. I'm sitting there one day on a gorgeous, absolutely stunning day on the side of the Lake Michigan side, and it was perfect. I'm sitting in the very same spot at night, and if there's a full moon, you can read the newspaper. It is so bright from the reflection, but there was no moon, and there was a heavy cloud cover, so there was no starlight. I felt like I was sitting in a bottle of ink. I mean, it was that dark. And there was some rustling in the bushes behind me.
Oh,
And
no.
it was kind of creepy and eerie. Yeah. And I thought, wow, anything could happen here. And it was like, I started thinking about day and night, good and evil, light and dark. And I thought, what a perfect place to set a mystery. A veneer of perfection, you know, what the
Mhm.
travel bureau would write, and then sinister forces at work beneath the surface. So that was the whole start of the first book and in fact, the series. And then I had to figure out, you know, as I like to tell people, it's like one thing to have this 2 or 3 sentence notion, you know, veneer, sinister forces. So you've got like 2 sentences. Well, you go from 2 sentences to 75,000 words
Yeah.
and 300 and some pages. There's a lot that you have to put in there. So what are the sinister forces? Who's responsible for them? Why? What happens because of them? Who dies? Who's the person who's killing them and why? And back and forth and back and forth. And as I was going through all of that, I knew just because of what you said before, that people who've lived there for a long time know who did what 40 years ago and why this person has that grudge and which family cheated, you know, all those strings.
Yeah, they're never gonna sit in the same pew at church.
No.
Yeah.
And
Right?
I needed somebody from the outside who didn't know all
Mhm.
of this, who had to figure it out the way the reader has to figure it out and has to find out all this stuff. So I needed an outsider. I needed a valid reason for the outsider to be there. And as I'm thinking all of this, there's this character forming like over here in the corner, and it's Dave Cubiak.
Mhm.
And Dave Cubiak grew up with the story as in my head, as I was thinking about it. I happen to know a lot of Chicago cops. They all happen to be guys. I also had an older brother, and I was the first girl in the family, so I had older boy cousins. I mean, I had all this boyhood, you know, in my life. And it just kind of seemed like a natural thing. And then when I actually sat down to start writing it, I had to ask myself, as a woman, are you going to write a male protagonist? And I thought, well, men have been writing women protagonists.
That's
for
right.
generations, right? So why not? And I felt like I had to just stay with Dave because he was there. He was he was part of the process of in my head of when it was all developing. So that's how I got Dave.
So the other part of the question, do you wish you had done maybe anything different with his character? Like, did you ever run into a roadblock because of something that you had already committed to in terms of the character, or something that you wish you could do that you kind of can't do now because you'd be contradicting yourself, or it just wouldn't have been in keeping with decisions you made earlier?
That never happened.
Okay.
In fact, what happened was one time I was trying to figure out how to get him to solve something. And I needed to be able to go back to something that would give him a hint.
Yeah.
And I was going through this multi-page profile I'd written, and I happened to come across something I'd completely forgotten about, that as a kid, he liked to draw and he thought he'd be an artist. So he liked to draw. So I had him sitting at his desk, doodling, drawing a design that reminds him of something he had seen earlier that day, that then leads him to
It's a
figure
clue.
it's a clue. So I got, rather, I
Mhm.
found something in there that was there all the time and was able to use it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was like, there was advice, and I forget where I picked this up along the way, some course or something, where they were saying you always need to know what your characters are doing off the page, because it'll help you make decisions about how they act, and it'll seem more organic, the reactions,
Yeah.
and they'll make more sense. So I'm curious, so you do a lot of plotting, but you're kind of talking about a point where you then were able to do an aha kind of moment on how to solve something. I think that there's confusion sometimes that if you plot too much, you don't have those, moments in time, like a pantser would have going, for the magic of writing, that you only follow that like strict outline. But I'm guessing you have a lot of those aha moments where you go, ha, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. And I have the aha moments when I'm plotting it out.
Right.
And to me, and everybody works differently. Everybody's brain works differently. But if I'm writing and not knowing who the antagonist is, I'm not knowing what comes next, I can't focus on what I'm writing because half of my brain is like, well, what's next?
Exactly.
What's next? What's
Yes.
next? So if I know the story, then I can just focus on telling the story. I don't have to worry about what comes next because I know it.
Yep. And I think too, like the one time that I really plotted heavily out what was going to happen in each chapter, that was the fastest I ever wrote. I wrote the book in 4 months and it's about, the same length, like 74,000 words. I mean, it just gave me my map. And it wasn't like I didn't write other stuff, but I knew what each chapter had to accomplish.
Yeah.
And I knew basically what was going to happen at the end. There was a little room for, making some decisions there. How long does it take you to write the full story? I mean, like the rough draft.
The rough draft.
Yeah.
Probably 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I really feel like you're all writers, right? And
A lot of them.
you have to,
She's not.
well, my press, you have to have faith in yourself and you have to have faith in your story. And how can you have faith in your story if you don't know the story? So, I mean, again, this is just my thinking. So when I start writing a new book, I don't worry about that first chapter. I don't worry. It's not quite right. Each book has kind of a feel, a sense, a life of its own.
Yes.
It assumes a cadence, it assumes a voice, it assumes a way of being told. And I don't get that till I'm maybe a third of the way in.
I got you.
So the first few chapters are always a struggle because I'm looking for that elusive, whatever it is. And then eventually I get it. And the rest of the book goes quickly. But I know that once I've got that feeling in that sense, I can come back to the beginning and that's when I can edit it and it's there. I mean, I know I can bring that essence of the book back to the beginning and go through it and then revise it.
Yeah, and I think, obviously the hardest part is getting that rough draft down. Once I have something to work with, it's sort of a relief,
Oh yeah,
to
can't
go
edit
back.
until it's written.
Go ahead, Mary.
Now that you have left this series, you basically ended a life in some ways. How do you configure yourself to create the next life? Or did you have someone lurking in the back?
Well, I have the novella that I'd written, and I also have another mystery that I wrote before I wrote the Dave Cubiak, and it's about 2 women. And it's their lives are intertwined from childhood on up, and then they split apart at one point, then they come back together for reasons that create the whole story. And so I'm going to go back to that, and that needs to be edited. So I've got my work cut out for me. That like I have the rough drafts.
So there you go.
Just go back and edit them. Yeah, yeah,
So different.
yeah. It's so that's going to be kind of fun and different. And in fact, in both of them, the narrator in the novella is a woman too. So they'll be different. And people keep giving me Kubiak ideas. So it's like
They don't want you to
they don't
stop.
want me to stop.
They
So
don't
I
want you
don't
to
know
stop.
what's going to happen this day.
Chris said thank you for the answers
Oh.
on the background and the main character. I figured that was Chris's question because I know his series, which I really, really love. And Chris has a new middle grade novel coming out too. So that's exciting. So will you always write mysteries?
I would like to write a historical mystery, but I don't know, the research would be overwhelming. But I do like historical mysteries, but I don't know. I mean, the novella is not a mystery.
Oh, okay, right. Okay.
So I ask myself that question, and I honestly don't know the answer to it. I think I'd like to try my hand at writing just like a literary story.
There you go. And then maybe series again.
And
Who knows?
maybe
Maybe.
what I've discovered is that two books with the same characters is considered a series. So
It
it
is.
doesn't have to be,
You always talk about
endless.
trilogies. You can have a duology.
Yes,
with
you
2
can.
books.
Yes, you can.
It's a real word, I swear.
It is.
So one thing that I always love in books is maps.
Mm,
So you thank your map drawer at one point. Is it the same person for all the
yes,
maps?
it's my daughter Julia.
I love the maps.
She does, yeah, she does a good job of it.
And and this one was fun in the last one because of, towns of the past.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff
And
in
those,
there.
there were many of them. I mean, that's.
Isn't
just
that
a
interesting?
sprinkling. Yeah, it's interesting because Door County is such a
In case you
pretty
guys-
place now. I mean, they have, you have the shipbuilding industry, so you have some kind of, the blue collar working element there, and the farmers and
Yes.
the orchard raisers and all of that. But at one point, it was the frontier. Wisconsin was the frontier. Door County was the frontier.
Mhm.
It was a rough and tumble place. There was a lot of murder and crime and drunkenness, and women were abused and children were abused. It was not a pretty place at all. It was logging
Yes.
and fishing. And, it was just a bunch of guys who worked and then got paid and went and got drunk. And that was it. That was life in Door County, and these little towns would pop up along wherever there was something that even looked like a harbor, because they would build a pier and the boats would come in and haul the logs away. And there might be 100 people would be in the area. And then once everything was logged off, the town just kind of went away, just died. They move on to someplace else. But it was a rough and tumble place.
You should write a historical mystery set in Door County.
There you go.
Have you ever done the Ephraim Historical Society tour or
No,
anything? So Ephraim has a historical society that's rather well endowed, and I don't remember now who it was who passed away, who gave them this large endowment, but they have full-time staff, which is not typical for a small town in Wisconsin. I mean, obviously Door County is a little bit of a different thing because you get so many tourists. But one of my friends, an author, Angie Stanton, who we've had here, she has a time travel set, a duology
Mhm.
at the moment. Of course, with time travel, you've got the historical component. And of the books, the main character is from Ephraim, but she had to know a lot about the place and, the history of it. That was fascinating, the tour that we took with him. We went in just as the season was kind of starting. And there was a volunteer who was like, sure, hop on. And they had this golf cart and he took us all over.
wow.
But there were so many fascinating things. And some of it was kind of unsubstantiated, like lore of the local area, who knows exactly. But did you know that there were people that farmed that had homesteads inside Peninsula State Park?
Oh, yeah.
And then they were kicked out when it was taken over and like.
There's a cemetery.
Yes.
The state park.
Yeah, it's actually really fascinating cemetery.
Yeah.
The headstones are very old, really an interesting spot. So
People probably not get down.
no, I think
No.
they left them. I think they left
They
the
left
residents of the cemetery. Or they got haunted if you tried to do that. Then they were talking about oh gosh, I'm not gonna get this right. The residents of, was it Strawberry Island? The early residents,
It was either Strawberry or Horseshoe.
Horseshoe.
Island.
Yeah, and I can't think of that name. It was a religious order and it's the church that's still there and I cannot think.
The Moravian.
Moravian, thank you. I knew it started with an M. And I knew it wasn't Mennonite, so. but, yeah, so that was a fascinating thing too. There's so much you could write about. We could probably start plotting it out right here and
Well, the Sturgeon Bay Library has a history room. And if you go in there, and I spent many hours in there going through like old police reports and things like that. And yeah, that's where you can come across a lot of grim stuff that went on and these homes, the county home where the disobedient wife could be sent. And the teenager who wouldn't listen to their parents and all kinds of things that went on that were just really, kind of grim. And, yeah, well, who knows, maybe. And there are fascinating things that happened up there. It was a different kind of life. I mean, and there were points in time when there's this marvelous building in Fish Creek called, and it's got a different name now, but it was the White Swan, I think, for a while. It was actually disassembled on the other side of the Bay of Green Bay and brought over on sledges and sleds in the winter time, and then reassembled, to build this resort.
And what building is it there? Like, it's one of the resort buildings?
Yeah,
it's
it's
Fish Creek?
In Fish Creek, yeah.
It's not the Waikol Inn.
No, not the White Inn, but and the name is escaping. I want to say White Swan, but that's not quite right. It's on the other.
That is fascinating though, because you forget how that the bay entirely freezes.
Yeah.
So the kids that lived on those farmsteads in Peninsula State Park had a long way to school during, when it wasn't cold, but they cut across the ice in the winter.
Yeah.
I mean, it cut off quite a few miles to get to school or, whatever.
But there would be
So-
horrible stories too of like the death's door, that strait at the top of the peninsula, freezing or almost
Mhm.
freezing, and people would try to cross. in the
Oh,
winter.
God, to
And-
Washington Island?
Yeah, and then they wouldn't, it wasn't quite as solid as they thought, and it just, a lot of horrible tragedies, and
Yeah.
to say nothing of all the shipwrecks.
Right. And because the currents are so bad.
The
up there.
currents are very bad.
Well, I'm sure you've been on Washington Island
Yeah.
probably numerous times.
I have. Death rides the ferry.
That's
for
right.
sure.
Is there the swimming thing? Do they actually swim to Washington Island?
There are people who they don't necessarily do it every year, but it's in one of the books.
It's in book-
Death Washes
a short,
Ashore.
yes.
There's a group of them that swims across the strait.
I didn't even know that was possible because of the currents in there. You can feel that on the ferry, that they're,
Yeah.
working hard.
They have, there are people in kayaks who kind of go along to make sure that they're okay. And they have to notify the shipping industry. They have to notify everybody.
Yeah, that you
there are
can't
gonna
be, like,
people in the
going
water
through.
without one of these oar boats coming through.
Yeah.
And to me, it sounds absolutely beyond frightening. I mean, I can't imagine
It's like
doing it.
crossing the English Channel. or something.
Yeah,
Right.
well, not quite as far, but probably as treacherous. Yeah.
It probably is cold.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, the water doesn't get super warm in the Great
No,
Lakes.
not at all.
I mean, Lake Superior is probably a little worse than Lake Michigan, but
That's pretty far north. So
yeah.
it gets to be, I don't, sometimes you just don't understand like why people do what they do. Like, why do people climb Mount Everest?
Yeah, no,
Where you can't breathe and your brain cells are dying.
If you didn't get the question online, why do people write thrillers
How do people, okay, I moved to Milwaukee like 3 years ago, and there's Lake Park has all these amazing ravines that, there's bluffs along the shore, along the lakefront. And with these incredible ravines that are really heavily forested, and I'm walking down this trail and I'm looking over the side and I'm thinking, the very first thought that comes to my mind when I moved to the city of Milwaukee is, what a great place to hide a body. It's like,
And I wonder if they've done that.
well,
I wonder if someone has.
I'm not sure that anybody has done that yet, but
Maybe they will in your next book.
well, who knows? I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities, and yeah, there's some interesting things. I've been trying to think of a way to connect Door County with Milwaukee and
Do that?
I'm kind of coming up with something that might.
I was gonna say, we keep pushing you toward Door County, but you may want to change settings, so
we'll
that's
see.
not really fair, so.
One thing I need to mention, if I can do a little
Oh, please do,
self-promotion.
please do.
During the pandemic, USA Today did an
Oh, those
article.
are lovely.
Thank you. I designed them myself.
Here, I'm gonna hold one
But
up.
they did an article about that we can't, 50, you can't travel right now, or people weren't traveling, but you can travel by reading. So they chose one book to represent every state. And I mean, like Carl Hyacin is on the list, and a few other people whose names are like, super sparkly. And the book they chose to represent Wisconsin, Death Star.
That's
Star
awesome,
County.
bravo.
Wisconsin.
Yay.
It says, travel the country with these evocative reads. So there you go.
Oh,
Can't get
that's
any
so
better than
fun.
that. Yeah.
Sylvia asks whether you have a particular writing routine.
Well, yes and no. I mean, my writing routine is that I try to do, if I'm working on a book, I spend a lot of time, as I say, just plotting it out.
Mhm.
But I spend a chunk of time. It doesn't matter if it's in the morning or if it's in the afternoon, as long as I have like 3 or 4 hours, sometimes 2 or 3, of time that's not interrupted. And if I've got like a lot of pesky emails that have to be dealt with, I need to get them out of the way so they're not like nagging at me, and then I'll write later in the day.
Yep.
But I just need that period of time that's not disturbed,
Right, right.
and then I work.
I don't work really great like later at night. Like I'm better, before like 3 in the afternoon. I don't know. I don't know. Mary, what do you tend to do? Are you more of a morning writer?
Anytime I want,
It doesn't bother you?
it's just whenever I think, yeah.
It's time to, you got it, that story in your head. How about you, Julia? When do you like to write?
I try to read to my writing. I because I should have
This is a good thing. Sometimes when I shut my door doesn't get like respected.
I can't write in the evening because then I'm still writing when I'm trying,
So when you try to go to bed,
Yeah.
then you're still in writing
I'm
mode.
still in writing mode,
Do
and
you wake up in the middle of the night, spend 3 or 4 hours, and your brain is writing?
yeah. I want to develop the machine that,
That will translate that.
yes, exactly, I don't have to.
Useful.
Right, it's just whatever's in my head is gonna appear magically on that sheet of paper.
Got it.
That's that next step in technology where we have the implant in our brain that then the AI takes over. I mean, that's a different kind of book
Yeah.
entirely.
But the AI is writing it.
Well, no, but this isn't AI, this is AI, this is my personal intelligence, it's writing the book, but it's just happening. I don't have to like do it.
Right.
It doesn't have to come through the nerves to the fingertips. to
Yeah.
the-
Do you type
I
type
do.
your stuff out? Yeah, I don't. I think my scenes go too fast for me to be patient enough for my handwriting. Then it gets messier and messier and then I can't read it anyway.
Yeah.
So I have to type.
But I edit.
I mean, some people
longhand.
like to write longhand.
Jennifer Egan writes longhand. God
Oh, I
love
can't
her.
believe.
I mean,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
During the pandemic,
Wow.
she'd wrap herself in an electric blanket and sit outside with a pen and her yellow legal pad, and
That's
it works for her.
yeah, everybody's got their thing, but that's unimaginable to me. I wouldn't be able to do it. So. Do we have any other questions? What time are we at? We're after 8. Yep. So other questions? No. But thank you.
Thanks
I
very
have to say, I so appreciate this series. I would have hung around longer, 14 books, 20 books, but I understand, we'll respect your decision. It's not like we can change it now, it's done, but we look forward to the next things that you write. I
you.
really like your writing.
Thank you.
I
very
really
much.
enjoy the stories. So thank you. Yay. Thanks for visiting.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here.